Hey folks, I've just finished recording the review of the HD560S and discovered a couple of audio dropouts during the video. That means I'm going to be using the camera audio in just a couple of short sections, so I apologise for the dropout. It happens twice pretty early on, but it should all be out of the way by about the 3-minute mark. I apologise for the drop in audio quality and thank you for your patience through the first few minutes of this video. Welcome to Passion for Sound, the channel dedicated to thorough and honest reviews of headphones, earphones, DACs, headphone amps, other components and accessories. Basically everything audio related except power amps and passive speakers. My name's Lachlan and my goal is to explore and discuss all kinds of audio topics, even the controversial ones, to help us all find more enjoyment from music. Thanks for watching and enjoy the video. Hey folks, welcome to another Passion for Sound audio review. And today we're talking headphones, specifically the Sennheiser HD560S. I want to start off by saying a huge thanks to Sennheiser Australia's PR team for sending out the HD560S. I'd originally hoped to get them in time for the HE400i 2020 review that I did recently. That's the Hi-Fiman HE400, but having not received them quite in time, I can now provide you with a full review of the HD560S and a comparison back to the HE400s. So stick around for that comparison and another comparison with a headphone that I think you might be interested to see me review in the future. For now though, let's take a look at the HD560S.
I was born in the city, I was raised on its edges. My pop work is life when it's complex. I found love in its center. If I could live here forever, think it'd be for the better. I love the weather, even though it's fog 24/7. I love the people, this is the city I met all my best friends. And I wanna thank every brick, I wanna thank every entrance to every building that I step in this city of mine. I owe you most my best moments in life. See, I fell in love for the first time in Golden Gate Park. I saw my first rap show at Great American Hall.
These headphones had some pretty heavy hype since it was released, so it was one of those headphones that I came into the review not quite sure what to expect. Whether or not it was going to be as good as the hype had suggested, or whether it was going to leave me a bit disappointed because my expectations were so high. For around $200 US or 300 Australian dollars, I feel like it's been touted a bit as the best and only option in that sort of price range. But there's some other great headphones in and around that range, so I was really keen to see just how it stacked up. The HD560S is a 120 ohm driver, so it's in sort of a middle range kind of impedance. It's not up there with the 250, 300 ohm or 600 ohm drivers that some brands and some models have, but at the same time it's not super efficient like say a 32 or a 50 ohm driver on some of the more portable friendly headphones out there. That's not to say this won't work on portable devices though, it's just not a super efficient headphone compared to some of the others that are really dedicated for portable use. Despite that impedance of 120 ohms, the sensitivity of the HD560S is very high at 110 decibels. What that means is you only need 84 milliwatts to get to 120 decibels with these. So they are actually very efficient, and that's why I'm saying they will work just fine with portable devices and also with desktop devices. To put that further into context, for 90 decibels, which is still a level at which you shouldn't listen for too long, you can get there with only 1 milliwatt with the HD560S. So don't worry about power requirements, it's really not a concern with these. In terms of accessories and what you get for your money, you've got a nice 3-meter cable with a 6.3mm connector, and it does come with a fly lead adapter from 6.3 down to 3.5. Now I personally quite like that approach rather than having the screw off or just the snap-on adapters. I quite like the fact as a more of a reference style, desktop style headphone that this is, I like the fact that they've stuck with a fixed 6.3mm and the 3.5 is the modification rather than it being a 3.5 to 6.3mm adaptation. So I quite like that. It's neither here nor there, both are going to work fine, but I do like this design. On the other end of the cable is a little 2.5mm multi-pole plug, and that's designed to connect to the bottom of one of the ear cups here, and that's going to allow you to feed the signal through to both cups. Now the fact that it uses multiple poles, it's got 4 poles on the small 2.5mm there, suggests to me that you could wire this for balanced if you wanted to. Having not pulled apart the headphone, I'm assuming the fact that there's 4 different contacts on the plug means that there's 4 separate wires feeding the different drivers, so a signal and a ground for each side. So in theory you could run these balanced, but I haven't confirmed that. And at the same time, Balanced isn't hugely important. So long as you've got a good single-ended output, it's going to sound just the same regardless. These don't need the power of a balanced output anyway. So with that in mind, let's put aside the cable and talk about the headphones themselves. Immediately when you take these out of the box, they feel significantly cheaper than their more expensive brethren, such as the HD560, 600, 6XX, etc. The plastics are nice, it's well made and it's good quality, but it just doesn't feel quite as solid and sturdy and luxurious a headphone as those more expensive models do. And that makes sense. It's a cheaper model, it needs to be made with cheaper materials. I like the physical design of the headphone. I think it looks great. On the inside of each cup, you've got a slight angle to the driver, so it's helping to produce that soundstage effect of having a forward angled input of the sound. But in other ways, it's just a pretty simple, basic looking headphone. It's worth mentioning that there is a lot of extension on these headbands, so for those of you with particularly large heads, or perhaps those of you that like to wear beanies or whatever and still be able to wear headphones over the top, these are going to work for you. While we're talking headband, the other thing I should mention is this notch you can see here in the headband material. Now this is something that Sennheiser have been doing for a while, and I think it's a great addition to the design. It takes a little bit of pressure off at the very top of the head and distributes it slightly to each side. And that means you don't tend to get the hot spot in the center of your head from where the majority of the weight of the headphone will sit if it's one continuous headband. Now there's lots of other headphones that have managed to do this differently, so it's not like the notch is the only option, but the notch works really well and it does make these very comfortable across the head. Where comfort gets a little bit different though is on the ear cups. These are a really funny kind of headphone for me in terms of comfort. They're comfortable to wear for extended periods, but they feel wonky when you put them on. These ear cups are very long and narrow, and so what I find is that there's this gap left underneath my ear when I put them on. I can actually stick my finger up between the pad and my skin without having to lift the pad away. So there's actually just a hole there all the time. It doesn't seem to affect the bass. I tried kind of pressing the pad in and moving things around and couldn't perceive any change in bass when I was doing it, but it makes them feel just a little bit clunky when you put them on. Like I just said a minute ago, I can wear them easily for long extended periods with no discomfort, but they don't feel quite right when I put them on. Hopefully that makes sense. So they're a headphone to me that feels cheap when you're wearing them, but as I'll talk about in a minute, they sound great and you can wear them for extended periods. So they're a bit enigmatic in that way. They've got some things that are great, some things that are not so great, and ultimately I'd put it down to the fact that they are a more budget headphone. And so really what matters here is how they sound, because if you're buying these, you probably know that you're buying a slightly more budget headphone. You're probably not expecting the build quality and the comfort of something like an HD560S, which is so much more expensive, but what you will be expecting is good sound quality. And I can say that you won't be disappointed. The HD560S is as good as people have been saying from a sound quality point of view. The sound is clean, it's neutral, it's quite detailed for a headphone at this level, and it's really hard to find fault with it at the price point. In fact, if I had to find fault, I'd probably say that it's just not the most engaging listen. But it's also not designed to be an engaging listen, it's designed to be a neutral reference headphone, and I think it generally does that quite well. It's a little bit light on bass weight for me, and that can leave things sounding a bit thin. That also leads into the mid-range not always having the weight and body that I wish it did, and therefore leaving the treble slightly overemphasized at times, but very, very slightly. The overall quality of the treble is fantastic. The quality of all frequencies is actually fantastic. It's just that it's a little bit on the dry and clinical side for me in terms of engagement. It's never harsh. It's never difficult to listen to. It just lacks a bit of soul for me sometimes. But if I'm looking at it more as a reference, mixing, mastering, trying to understand the source equipment type of headphone, then it's absolutely perfect in that regard. I would like to hear just a touch more bass in the lower registers, but that's about the only thing I'd say it should have from a reference point of view. Finally, I mentioned before the angled drivers. They are doing a good job because the soundstage from the 560S I would say is very good for the price. Once again, it's not up there with much more expensive headphones, but at the price, it's doing a really, really good job. Enjoying this video? If you are and you'd like to help me make more videos like this one, there are lots of ways you can help, and most of them don't cost you a cent. You can help for free by liking this video, subscribing and ringing the bell, sharing this video on social media or your favorite audio forums, or by making your next purchases using any of the affiliate links in the description. Obviously that's not technically free, but you're not spending anything extra and it all helps out. Want to go a step further? You could buy some merchandise, t-shirt, hoodies, caps and the like, or you can join the Passion for Sound family on Patreon. It's a growing community with plenty of interesting discussion and your chance to influence what happens on the channel. Check out the description for more information and links where relevant. But for now, let's get back to the video. As always, I think it's good to put some of this into perspective, so let's talk about a couple of specific track examples. The first one I want to talk about is Slow Down by Kev Mo. This is a wonderfully recorded track with lots of dynamics and punch and rhythm to it, and I found the 560S did a pretty good job across the board with it. My biggest complaints once again were the bass. The track itself should have a nice drive and rhythm to the bass, and the HD560S did fall a bit short in that regard. Other than that though, the tonality of vocals and instruments was really good across the board, and sounds were really well separated as well, so it was very, very good at doing what it was doing. It just needed that touch more bass. Moving over to A Song For You by Donny Hathaway though, we start to see where I think the Achilles heel of the 560S is. The piano sounds just a little bit lightweight and lacking in richness and harmonics from the 560S. It's just a bit dry and a bit lacking in soul. Donny's voice is also a little bit lacking in richness and character, and ultimately it just left me feeling like I was listening to a fairly good reproduction rather than a live performance, and for me, that's often my reference point. Now, I'm not suggesting for a second that there's other headphones in the same price point that would have done a significantly better job. I'm just putting this into the context that it is still a budget headphone that's doing an excellent job for a budget headphone, but with its limitations. And so to further contextualize this, I wanted to provide a couple of comparisons in this review like usual. I thought about a few headphones in my collection that I could have used, one of them being the DT880 250 ohm, the black limited or special edition I think it's called, another one being the Drop HE4XX, and of course the HE400i 2020 that I already mentioned. I didn't want to extend the review too much, so after some thinking and some listening, I threw aside the DT880 and the HE4XX because I don't think either of them come as close to what the HD560S is doing, or the performance level for that matter, as the HE400i 2020. I think those are more comparable in terms of what they're offering, what they're presenting. I think the HD560S is a better headphone than the DT880, at least the version that I have, which is not the standard normal version anyway. And so I've focused on the HE400i 2020 and the Audeze LCD1 as a slightly more expensive option that you might also consider. But let's start with the HE400i. The first thing I noticed with the HE400i is when you put it on, it initially feels more comfortable because it seals nicely around the ear and it kind of envelops your head a bit more. These, as I said before, feel a bit clunky when you put them on. On extended listening though, I actually find the HD560S more comfortable in the long term, even taking into account the fact that I'm aware of the lack of seal. If you look at the graph on screen, you'll notice that there's a treble peak in a similar spot for both headphones. But in the case of the HE400i, it's actually 4 decibels higher, and that's a significant jump. That's over twice as much power coming through, or twice as much output coming through at that particular point. And it does make the HE400i sound just a little bit brighter and leaner as a headphone. The result is that the HD560S sounds a bit smoother out of the two of them. Whether that's better or worse is going to be personal preference. I probably slightly prefer the 560S. In terms of transparency though, things go in the other direction, where I find the HE400i to be the more transparent sounding headphone. Now that I think is more to do with the driver type and less to do with the tuning. I think the planar magnetic technology generally to me provides a cleaner, crisper sound than most dynamics do. That's not a hard and fast rule across the board, but I do often find I lean towards planars because of that sense of transparency in the sound. So for me, the HE400 wins on transparency, the 560S on tonality and frequency response. Where the HD560S also wins is in its overall soundstage presentation. The HE400i is a more intimate and compressed feeling soundstage that's still good, but the HD560S is definitely larger and particularly it's wider. It doesn't throw a huge amount of depth, but a good sense of width. With the HE400i 2020 being about $30 cheaper than the HD560S, it's a tough call to me to say which of these two I prefer. I think both have their place. I think I'd lean towards the 560S from a long-term listening and or monitoring point of view. I think the HE400i has proven, as I talked about in my review of it, to respond really, really well to a bit of EQ to give it some extra weight and body and therefore balance out that treble spike. So both have their pros and cons. If you want something you can pick up, listen to, and it's going to be just right, I think I'd go to the HD560S. If you're happy to apply a bit of EQ and you want an extra dash of transparency in the sound, I think the 400i is a good choice. But both are actually excellent, and I would happily have either. So that's the direction I'd go if you're working in that $200 budget range. But if you had a bit more money and were looking at other options, one option that I happen to have here for comparison is the Audeze LCD1. This is the baby LCD model. I forgot to do B-roll for this, I apologize for that. But you can see here, and you'll see in the upcoming review of this one, it's a very compact headphone, but it's still a planar magnetic. It's a really compact, comfortable, portable, so you can also fold it up and take it with you. It's a really nice little option. At roughly double the price of the HD560S, it obviously has to prove itself in order to be worth considering over and above the HD560S, but then that's what this comparison was all about, which is to say, is it worth spending more and going for something like the LCD1 rather than the 560S? Make sure you subscribe if you want the full review of the LCD1. It's coming up in about a month or so, but what I do want to say now is that Audeze kind of positioned this a little bit as a portable, compact studio type of headphone. And so that's why I wanted to put the two of them up against one another. The HD560S isn't really portable, but it's robust enough that you could carry it around with you, given an appropriate bag or pouch. So putting the two side by side, I was really keen to see if it was worth spending more. And what I found immediately was that the sound from the LCD1 is much more intimate than that from the HD560S. It's a more closed-in sound. It's also a warmer, richer sound. But don't think that means it's bad. It's not thick or muddy or anything like that. It's actually better resolving than the HD560S. It's just doing it in a different way. I found the extra bit of weight and warmth from the LCD1 makes it a more natural sounding headphone. So on a track like this year's Kisses by Ella Fitzgerald, I found that the sound from it was much more true to what I would expect to hear if I was standing in the room with Ella Fitzgerald singing. The HD560S constantly reminded me that I was listening to a recording through a pair of decent headphones. The LCD1 had a more natural tone that helped it sound more realistic, but at the same time didn't have the sense of size and space in the soundstage to really have me forgetting that I was listening to headphones. So ultimately they've both got their pros and cons. If I had two of them sitting in front of me and I could choose either, I would personally go for the LCD1 because I like its presentation better. But it doesn't do everything as well as the 560S in terms of being really, really neutral and also producing that slightly larger soundstage. For me, I would call the LCD1 more natural, whereas I think I would call the 560S more neutral, and it depends on what you're looking for. The LCD1, as you'll hear in my review, are an absolute joy to use. The HD560S have a few trade-offs because of their price, but are really, really good at what they're aiming to do, which is to be a neutral reference style headphone. So ultimately, after all of my testing and listening with these, what I found is that the 560S really is as good as people are saying. To me, it's not the perfect headphone. It has a few little issues in terms of lacking a little bit of weight in the notes and the bass, also having this funny long ear cup that does stick past the ear and doesn't seal particularly well. But for the money and for what they're designed to do, I do think they're a really excellent choice. And I don't think there's another headphone at $200 that I would definitively recommend over these. I would go towards the HE400i 2020 version. If you're willing to add a bit of EQ, I do think it might offer some slight benefits over these, but a lot of people are going to like the sense of neutrality that the 560S brings. So if that's the sort of headphone you're looking for, one that's neutral with maybe a tiny bit of extra emphasis on the upper mids and treble compared to the overall frequency range, then the HD560S are definitely worth considering and probably should be at the top of your list if those are your criteria. They're not a warm and engaging headphone, but they're also not intended to be. If you're looking for warmth and engagement, look to the HD6XX as a much better option. These are neutral, reference you could potentially call them, but I think analytical might be the better term and one that is actually used on the 560S box. So if you're looking for that, definitely check out the HD560S. If this review's been useful, please think about hitting the subscribe button so you can check out future content that I hope will be just as good as this has been for you. Also, hitting the like button really helps me to get reviews like this one to you and people like you, so I really appreciate it. For now though, I'll leave you to the music, so happy listening and I'll see you here next time on Passion for Sound.